Hey guys, Jan here, and welcome back to another video. So I've had the pleasure to speak to Oliver Brackenbury, editor of the literary magazine Edge Sword and Sorcery, and host of the wonderful podcast So I'm Writing a Novel. I had a very great conversation with Oliver, and he revealed some really cool insight about what goes on in creating a magazine, and some exciting plans for the future. But with that out the way, let's have a listen to what Oliver Brackenbury has to say.
So I'm Oliver Brackenbury. Among other things, I am the host of So I'm Writing a Novel. That's the podcast that was being referenced there, which is all about, as it suggests, me writing a sword and sorcery novel, and I mix that in with interviews. So yeah, but I'm here today in my capacity as editor and publisher of New Edge Sword and Sorcery magazine. Here's the hardcover. Yes, it comes in hardcover of our prototype issue that came out last year, issue 0. It's available cheap as hell. We sell that one for no profit at all, so it's free in digital, and it's like $4 in softcover, I want to say, 11 for hardcover. Literally the cheapest that Amazon would let us sell it for, because the whole point was that it was like, let's get this out here as proof that we're serious about what we're doing. And it was a very important step because that played into people believing, okay, yeah, they can make a magazine. When last February this year, we did a crowdfund for issues 1 and 2, which I'm now just starting today with this very recording, doing the rounds to try and promote, because those issues 1 and 2 will be released in mid-November. We were hoping for mid-October, but this is our first rodeo with what's called traditional offset printing, so like proper printing, quote unquote, as opposed to print on demand. And it's a whole process. I've learned a lot, and we're already taking steps so that our turnaround for next year's issues will be like half. But yeah, I've had to do a lot of learning. It's worth it though, right? Because you get a higher quality product. I'm really excited. The hardcover alone, I've actually got like a blank one here. They send you these. It's called like a dummy proof, and it's got stickies because I've turned into a notebook. But anyway, blank pages and stuff, right? And you won't really be able to see this too easily on camera. But what's nice is it's instead of glue binding, it's sewn stitched, so it lays perfectly flat for reading. And you can actually like print right into the spine, so like a 2-page spread won't have that weird white space through the middle. Yeah, a whole bunch of little things like that. Oh, and also it's going to have a ribbon bookmark, yay! Which will be a different color for each issue, a color lifted from the cover art. Because we try to be really thoughtful about our choices with this thing. We really think quality is a big part of what will help set it apart, So yeah, those are currently available for pre-order. And I hope I will remember to give you the link, and you can put that in the show notes. But if all else fails, you can check out everything to do with the magazine at newedgeswordandsorcery.com. And spoiler, we're hoping to expand into publishing books next year. If our Kickstarter in February does well and doesn't, if that cratered, we'd be discouraged. But if we succeed in February, which I'm feeling good about, part of how we're actually going to reduce our turnaround next year is I'm having the writing done in advance of the campaign this time, because I feel that confidence. So yeah, anyway, assuming all that goes well in February, we're going to be hopefully doing a themed anthology. The Kickstarter for that would be in June. And the theme is a secret for now, but I'll reveal that later. Yeah. And another special paperback book, which again, it's all veiled in secrecy for now, but that would be next September. So yeah, we're going to expand into books next year, which is great.
I guess the best question I could kind of ask is why SNS specifically, and what does it mean to you?
Well, I really like sword and sorcery. It's funny, I kind of slid off of contemporary fantasy at large for a long time. I don't know why, but when you're 11 or 12 and like some kids just get in their head, and I was one of them, that you have to like choose a team between science fiction and fantasy. Yeah. For some reason, I was like, science fiction's more sophisticated, so I just like dropped. I don't ask. I was like 11 or 12. But yeah, I just like dropped fantasy for a long time, and I didn't really actually climb back on for quite a stretch, because I found I have enjoyed like epic and high fantasy and like grimdark and other sort of subgenres of the fantasy umbrella, but I find most of them don't really do it for me, because I can't relate. The stakes being always kind of world ending, and everybody being like nobles and what have you. Like, I don't really. I mean, I'm making broad statements. There's exceptions to everything I'm saying, of course, but you know what I mean. The mean average, right, of the Tolkien-esque vibe. I just can't relate to it. I can't get into it. But I really like Sword and Sorcery, where you tend to be focused on sort of like lower, echelons of society, people who are more like thieves and outcasts, barbarians, obviously,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. They're characters who, even though obviously their lives are very different to mine, I can relate to them a little easier because they feel kind of like, yeah, they're almost like working class heroes, and not necessarily heroes, right? They're a little more like me, where like they're just trying to get by. How many say Fafhrd and Grey Mouser stories are them being heroic versus them just trying to like steal a gazebo because they're drunk or like whatever, do silly ass things. So yeah, I find Sword and Sorcery more relatable. I find I enjoy how the characters can be quite competent, but are virtually never, again, there's exceptions, chosen ones. You know what I mean? They're people. They're just people. I like that. And I like how sorcery is handled. I like how it tends to be very mysterious and dark. There's a lot of horror and weird elements, weird with a capital W, coming back from its origins in the pulps, that feel more unpredictable and more interesting to me than when sorcery is kind of just like a technology. You know what I mean? In some stories where it's like, oh, I need a light on. I'll use eldritch power to turn on a lamp. That kind of thing. It's just not for me. Just not for me. I don't want to poo-poo what other people enjoy. But yeah, so Sword and Sorcery, I kind of like how it has this kind of funny thing of being like more grounded, right? Like the heroes, like I was describing, tends to be lower fantasy too, although again, always exceptions. But the fantastic elements are less codified. The creatures tend to be more strange and unusual. There's not just like, oh, here's a classic lich or here's a classic troll. D&D tells me that one will be afraid of fire. You know what I mean? The odds, the strange elements are stranger and more dangerous and more prone to surprise. And so there's this kind of great like clash between that more grounded protagonist, more weird and unpredictable fantastic element that just makes it more exciting to me. There's a whole bunch more I could say, but that's sort of the gist. And oh, I should probably mention, I did fall in love with it before my weird, I'm going to get off of fantasy for a while thing, where I was reading Savage Sword of Conan, the big black and white magazine.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool to read as a kid, because it was just like art was tight, and stories were tight. It was a mix of adaptations of original Howard stories, Robert E. Howard, and other stuff that they just made up themselves. And of course, as like a 10-year-old boy, I didn't mind there was some violence and nudity. I mean, why not, right? So yeah, that's kind of like what like hooked me in. And I never entirely fell off of Conan as much as I kind of fell off of fantasy in general. But then yeah, fast forward many years forward to about 7 years ago. I was volunteering at an archive in the city where I live, Toronto, the Merrill Collection, which is the Western Hemisphere's largest publicly accessible archive of speculative fiction. It's got over 80,000 items, all kinds of rare, out of print stuff, and you just need a library card to check it out. It's been an amazing resource for my writing. And I was there and I just remembered reading Savage Sword of Conan. I was like, I don't think I've actually read the stories. I mean, I've read the magazine, but I never actually read straight up Howard. What am I doing? So, of course, I had that there. I started reading it, fell in love, as so many people do. And then from there, I just was able to read. I just binged and binged and binged and binged and binged. I read like 80 books in 2020 because I had some extra reading time, as a lot of us did that year. Yeah, and sort of this escalated to me then looking for a community, like, oh, who else likes Sword and Sorcery, And I found the Discord for Whetstone magazine, which I recommend. It's free to read, wonderful magazine. And just got to know people there, made friends. We started. I guess I'm seeing into the origin story of the magazine here. I hope that's okay. Early 2022, there was just like a big conversation that was kind of one of those things that comes up over and over again. In any community, you have the conversations that are kind of circular, and this was just like, how do we make Sword and Sorcery more popular again? Because it kind of, for anybody who's watching who isn't familiar, Sword and Sorcery had a big second wave of popularity that ran through like 60s and 70s and early to mid 80s, depending on who you want to ask about it. And then it kind of went boof and it busted because it just got a little repetitive and people's perception of it was kind of limited. Some of the more interesting stuff that was coming out in the 80s, like Charles Saunders and Morrow books, were not being marketed very well. So yeah, it just kind of went boof and busted and was still largely laying fallow even as recently as a year ago, although there's been some pretty cool publications like Tales from the Magician's Skull that have come out in more recent years to help build towards maybe a third wave that I'm hoping for. Anywho, so the point is, how do we get more people reading Sword and Sorcery? It was a common conversation in the community. And when that came up this time around, it actually went some interesting places. And a big part of what put some energy into it was Howard Andrew Jones, an author and magazine editor himself. He coined a term in the early 2000s that he wanted to use called New Edge Sword and Sorcery. And to him, his definition of it was basically just like, hey, let's take the genre forward. It has kind of reputation for having some grody elements because it was written, back in the 30s. It was born, so there was a lot of like unfortunate attitudes that would find their way in that were just the way a lot of people thought back then.
Yeah.
And even a little bit of that, from the 60s and 70s, if you look at certain authors. So, it's not like it's like a tainted. It's no more than really any other genre, in my opinion.
Yeah.
You go back to the 30s in most things, you'll find some attitudes that are not great. But yeah, and so Howard was just kind of like, look, why don't we make a conscious effort to update the genre and keep everything that makes it really cool, the fast-paced action, the weird horror, the grounded protagonist, all that good stuff. But let's just like make an intentional effort to just weed out any, weird old attitudes that we might be replicating in a less thoughtful way of writing the genre. Sometimes you love something so much and you want to make it, but then you don't think very hard about it, and maybe you kind of copy paste some stuff you shouldn't. So yeah, it was just this idea of just let's take a more intentional attitude and spruce it up and make more people feel welcome.
Yeah.
Right. And so yeah, no, I don't think the idea's time was quite there yet in the 2000s, because in the 2000s, I think some of the lingering bad reputation from the mid 80s bust was still there. A lot of people still kind of thought of like bad Clonan movies, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like not the 1982 Conan movie, but some of the admittedly quite funny sometimes, but still bad, like Italian barbarian movies from like the mid 80s. So people would just be like, oh, that's sword and sorcery. And I think maybe, yeah, it didn't quite happen there. But fast forward to beginning of last year, that big conversation on the Discord, and Howard was like, well, maybe now is the time. It's been another like 10 odd years. A lot of people don't even think of sword and sorcery that way anymore. They're just too young in a lot of cases, unless they went back through the records, So yeah, and I was like, yeah, that sounds pretty good, and yeah, let's get some more, more young people. Let's get some more people outside of the dominant demographic, which is still kind of largely white guys that are like 35 plus.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with them. You're looking at one, but some of my best friends. But it's not about excluding anybody or removing anybody who's already there. It's about like expanding, bringing more people in. And so yeah, this conversation just went on for like 3 days. It was so intense. It was probably the wildest like online conversation I've been a part of. And by the end of it, I just was like, like light a cigarette. Like it's just like, man, that was something. There's some energy here. And I had already been thinking for a couple of years, like, oh, I'd really like to do a magazine. I love magazines. I love the layout. I love short fiction, but I didn't have a focal point yet. And then here I am thinking, I think there's all this energy. What if I did something with that, And I was kind of, we talked about it, we mulled it around, talked about like a philosophy, like a broader, manifesto, whatever. But eventually you got to like make something, right?
Yeah.
You got to make something that proves your idea. Scott Oden, another author who's on the server, and he's a great guy. You should check out his work. He kindly sort of like nudged at me, at one point. Was like, why don't you actually make something? So, people suggested an anthology, but I was like, no, magazine, done. Okay, so it's starting June last year. Me and some guys I knew from the server got together, worked on it, made this prototype. And, I'm still very proud of it, but I'm even more proud of issues 1 and 2, because, of course, this was where we learned a bunch of stuff. And we applied those lessons to issues 1 and 2, and got some pretty cool stuff in it, including no less than a new, fully original. It's not like an excerpt from something else that's being published. It's a completely new Elric story written by Michael Moorcock himself, which is really pleasing, right? And you might think, well, Oliver, like, what about? I thought it was about like bringing in new authors and people who aren't old white guys. It's like, yeah, okay, well, look at the rest of the table of contents. It's absolutely a good mix of people. But part of what I love about the magazine is that it allows me to, it's like the why not both, GIF girl from that taco ad or whatever, right? Just like, I feel like we can be in dialogue with the past. We don't want to get rid of it. Why would we? And also be looking to the future and just kind of preserve, like I say, like, it's like the slogan we've boiled it down to recently. We say the magazine's made with love for the classics and an inclusive, boundary pushing approach to storytelling. And it even comes into our logo, which I guess you can probably just put up on the screen, but for fun, I'll do this. Yeah. You can see it's like, oh, there we go. It's a battle axe with 2 faces, right? One looking to the past, one looking to the future. So yeah, like that's kind of in our core, memorandum here. Like we want to have like, for example, look at our nonfiction. We have interviews with currently working authors and publishers and so on about like what they're doing. But we also have like profiles on historically important sword and sorcery authors and publishers and editors who maybe haven't gotten the attention they deserve. For example, I mentioned Charles Saunders earlier. We have a profile on him coming up in issue 2 of New Edge Sword and Sorcery. So yeah, written by a guy who was friends with him and worked with him, Milton Davis. Yeah. So yeah, that's like kind of brings us up to, I guess, sort of modern day with the magazine and what I'm doing with it in the broad strokes.
the horror elements are a lot more pronounced. Like Conan stories did have horror, but they were still very much exciting. The first story is a literal gut punch. After finishing that, I was like, holy crap, that was horrifying.
Yeah, Carnivora by Kurt Johnson.
Yeah, Carnivora, yeah.
Well, it depends, right? Because it varies from author to author and what their goals are.
Yeah.
Certainly, like horror has always had a home in Sword and Sorcery because Sword and Sorcery was born out of the 30s when like we didn't genre distinctions weren't as tight as they are now. Another reason I like the genre, another reason it can kind of surprise you a bit more.
Yeah.
And I do encourage the authors I work with, I'm like, hey, don't get too stressed about like, oh, is it horror? Is it Sword and Sorcery? Is it just as long as it's recognizable as SNS, broadly speaking, that's cool. And it goes back to its origins. Like if you read, say, Jarell Jury, the stories by C.L. Moore, there's a lot of big, weird psychological horror in that. Or you read Clark Ashton Smith, who really leans harder into horror than Sword and Sorcery most of the time, but definitely has a lot of recognizable SNS tales. Just one thing I love about the genre is that it's very flexible. And you can do a lot with it and still keep it recognizable as Sword and Sorcery. It's been said that Robert E. Howard himself would drape Sword and Sorcery like a cloak over other genres. Like God in the Bowl is a locked room mystery that has like a weird serpent god, or he'd do like pirate stories, or like what's it called? Beyond the Black River is basically a frontier western tale, but told in the Sword and Sorcery milieu, that kind of thing. So Kurt came to me, he's like, yeah, I got like basically a horror story, but it's Sword and Sorcery. It's also kind of sword. What am I looking for? The term Spear and Fang is what some people like to call like Stone Age Sword and Sorcery, right? Because you may remember in the story, like they're like, this one tribe is hearing about another one that uses this weird metal called bronze, right? So yeah, like there's like a lot going on there that maybe isn't like the absolute platonic ideal of what a Sword and Sorcery story might be in some people's heads, but all the elements are there. All the elements are there, including like maybe this one leans a little harder into the horror, kind of angle. People are experimenting, and you're not going to get like the same story basically by 10 different authors.
One of the things I definitely loved was how there's a variety of cultures in it. I mean, from Pillars of Silence to, I'm gonna butcher this, Chakmuch. I'm sorry if I butchered that.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, that's the Mayan story, and of course, like in the Sisters of Chaos, and like I want to say it's like Mongolia, Asia, and all of it.
Yeah, it's basically Mongol steppe culture.
Yeah, and all of it worked fantastically. I really liked that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean that comes back to sort of our whole like diversity remit kind of thing of like, yeah, let's have a variety. I mean, a lot of fantasy that we read is based out of Western Europe, and so Western, or it's either like set in it or it's riffing on it in a secondary world. And broader contemporary fantasy has a lot of books that go outside of that realm, but could use more. And Sword and Sorcery, I find, could definitely use a lot more. So yeah, I've made a point of like reaching out to authors who I know will write in different milieus than like the ones we're necessarily used to. Not that I throw classics out the window, right? I mean, when you get to issue 2, you'll see David C. Smith's story is kind of a classic, very trad feel, and I'm here for that too. I just want to me, like I said, it's not about excluding anything. It's not about burning the old. It's about bringing in new, bringing in variety. And in fact, Chakmuch is translated from Spanish, so it's actually originally published in. So that's kind of fun too, that we have a translated story, and we're getting an author from outside of Western, I can't speak to. Sorry, guys, I'm still waking up. Outside of like the Western milieu, Australia, Europe, North America, kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and how did you find like these authors outside of like the Anglosphere?
Honestly, it all just comes down to chatting. If I wasn't just like terminally online, I don't know how I would have found some of them. Not that they're obscure, but just because like, most of the authors in the magazine don't have like big trad pub deals. You know what I mean? They're not like Simon & Schuster or whatever. They're mostly working, in the trenches, selling short fiction to magazines. And so, yeah, like a lot of it came out of just meeting people through either the Whetstone Discord, and then, later, my own Discord from New to Edge Sword and Sorcery. And then also just people making me aware. As soon as you announce like, oh, I'm an editor, I'm doing a magazine, it's only commissions right now, sorry, no subs, you'll still get people who reach out to you and go, well, hey, have you heard of this? You heard of that guy? Have you heard of this guy? And I was very lucky, a fellow named Gonzalo Baez, who was on the Westland Discord, saw what I was doing, liked it, I guess he must have, and reached out to me and said, "Hey, man, I translate, and I would be happy to, as a way of supporting the magazine, donate a free translation of a story." Which, that's generous. Translation costs. You're basically paying for the story twice or more, depending on the rates of the translation. So he very generously offered me that. Of course, I was like, yes, please. And then he's like, okay, well, I know you don't speak Spanish, so he went off and he kind of did some research and read, of the handful of Spanish language sword and sorcery magazines that you can find in like Central and Southern America. And then he found a few options, translated the first pages of a few stories, and I was like, okay, this one looks best. Okay, let's reach out to that author, and he was game. So voila, that's how we got, Jesus Montalvo, who is in Mexico City. So yeah, and then other people just, Daryl Keogh was recommended to me by someone. Yeah, like it's just a lot of recommendations and chatting with people, basically. I would also encourage, actually, anybody who's watching this who's kind of like, well, how do I get noticed when I'm not hanging around that server? Well, one author that I ended up grabbing for next year's issues, I actually had read a book by her, and Preeni Muhammad, and it was a completely not SNS book, so I loved it. But I was like, I moved on my life. I did not think about getting her, but I like her work and find her interesting, so I followed her on Blue Sky, which seems to be the refuge from the creator of Twitter. I'm enjoying myself there anyway, and I followed her on there, and one day she just was like, "Oh, I'm rereading all of Elric again," and sharing like excerpts of what she liked and drawings and just like what she enjoyed. And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I reached out to her and was like, "Hey, so like, would you want to write Sword and Sorcery?" And she was like, "So okay, I think I just spoiled one. Well, whatever. Prima Muhammad's going to be in issue 3 or 4 next year. I haven't assigned her to an issue yet, but yeah, okay, you heard it here first." So like that, but that's just a good example of why, like, share what you love online. You never know what editor might be watching. Oh, and for heaven's sakes, especially if you're an artist, this is how I found a lot of artists I ended up working with. Have some kind of online portfolio. It can be just an Instagram account. It can be a fully designed custom website, and link to it in your socials. That sounds so obvious, but a lot of times I've come across people who have what looks like cool work, and especially on Blue Sky, which doesn't have DMs yet, I have no way of really reaching out to the person about their work. I can, or unless I want to just like shout at them publicly, like, "Hey, can I hire you?" You don't want to do that. Yeah. So yeah, yeah. I guess in a roundabout way, like that is one way I've discovered writers and artists, is just by like tripping over them on social media, and then they actually have contact info, hurrah, or recommendations, and then just thinking of authors I've enjoyed in the past and reaching out to them, being like, "Hey, do you think you might want to do this?" So yeah, that's the gist of that.
And this is going to sound strange, so bear with me. I think artists are being sort of respected again. I'm not sure if you have been keeping at all with like D&D. Like when you compare like the new rule book compared to the old one, or even like some of like the Dragonlance calendar. At the back of the calendar there would be the portraits of the artists, and you can tell that TSR understood that part of the success of Dungeons and Dragons was through the art, and how these artists were just allowed to just go wild and be experimental. And unfortunately, I've sort of seen this, that's sort of been put to the wayside in a lot of like mainstream stuff. But this like indie stuff, like once again, artists are like telling you, okay, you could be creative again. You can let your style grow. And there's clearly an appreciation. I mean, it's very clear when you speak to these artists, you deeply appreciate their work.
Yeah, well, I know what you mean, right? Like how like Fifth Ed D&D has like a house style.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
And yeah, that doesn't really do it for me, because even though I can recognize that maybe the subject matter is interesting and it's technically well executed, but that sameness that makes it creates a brand for them, right? So when you're looking at contemporary D&D, but it always just tells me, oh, I'm looking at contemporary D&D. I don't get excited 9 times out of 10. But then you look at the OSR, you look at, say, things affiliated with the OSR, like Dungeon Synth, and voila, people are, they're looking back to those older editions of D&D where they could, go a little wilder, and like it was always like, oh, hey, an Errol Otis, piece or whatever. You'd actually know the names of the artists. They're very distinct styles. So yeah, Sword and Sorcery has a strong history with art. I love the art side. That's a big part of why I wanted to do a magazine instead of an anthology series. I was like, get more art in there. Our first stretch goal in February of this year was doubling the amount of interior illustrations, and we hit it. So every story gets 2 illustrations. Most of the articles get 2 illustrations as well. So yeah, nice art heavy magazine. And speaking about respecting the artist, something I wish I thought of for issue 0, but it's too late now. But we learned it for issues 1 and 2. We in issue 0, if you go to like the first page of a story, you'll see, story title by author. We didn't put the artist there. We put them in the table of contents, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I'm glad we did think of then was we asked all our authors with Instagrams to give us artists with Instagrams to give us their handles, so we could put that in the table of contents.
Yeah.
Make it as easy as possible for new fans to look into that artist. But we didn't credit them on the stories, and I feel kind of crappy about that. So issue 1 and 2, we were like, okay, now you would have seen this with Carnivora right at the start. Carnivora by Kirk A. Johnson. Art by Daniel Vega in that case. And so I think artists definitely deserve pretty equal credit because they get people so excited, and they sell things. Just people judge things by their cover. I know you're not supposed to. And I mean, think about Sword and Sorcery, of course, like the big man himself, Frank Frazetta. You put a Frank Frazetta cover on something back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and just boom, the sales were huge. So don't tell me artists aren't at least as important as writers in this genre.
I mean, even with the movies you mentioned, I mean, it really pains me because I look at the poster and I go, damn, that's so cool. But I know for a fact if I watch the movie, it's not going to match the quality of the poster.
A lot of them, yeah. Yeah. I'm old enough. I remember being in like the rental store, and I'd be looking at the VHS tapes of movies I wasn't old enough to rent. I'd be a kid or whatever, and it'd be like an R-rated horror movie or some of the Sword and Sorcery movies. And I'd just be like standing there looking at the box, looking at the like little screen captures on the back, and like imagining the movies. I don't know. Just like the art seizes you, right? And that's my hope. That the cover art for the magazine will inspire people to pick it up, of course. But also have them be like, man, what story does that come out of? I want to read that thing. So no, I love the art element, and I want to. It's tricky, I want to make sure the magazine has a distinct visual thing. I want that branding thing, right? I want people to be like, oh yeah, this is what the magazine looks like. Oh, I'm looking at New Edge Sword and Sorcery. But I also want to have variety. I don't want to fall into that house style thing.
Yeah.
So I'm right now trying to figure out, who do I bring back next year for the art? I'm gonna bring back everybody who's been new to the magazine this year, right? Because I like the idea of having people back at least one more time. But then it's like, do I keep asking them back forever? Do I bring back all the artists from issue 0? I don't know. I can only print so many artists. And so like you have to choose between kind of like stagnation feels too strong a word, but having exactly the same guys over and over, or having total variety, which sounds great. But there are magazines that are long running that I find don't have a visual identity because they are always swapping out everybody. So I'm trying to strike a middle ground right now. I'm trying to pick like a few artists who, maybe I'll keep bringing them back, and they'll be like the core 4 or 5, and then new guys wrapped around that. I don't know. We'll see how it goes going forward. But I'll just say this: the covers for issues 3 and 4 are going to be so different from the covers you'll see in issues 0, 1, and 2, and I'm excited to see how people react to that. Because I don't. It's too soon to get locked into one style.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Of course. Yeah. Well, just on that note, I mean, I personally really liked the cover for issue 1. It reminded me a lot of is her name Catherine Jeffrey? She did a lot of Fafford and the Grey Mouser covers.
Oh,
that gave me that vibe.
it's interesting.
Yeah, that's...
Oh, I can see that. Yeah, maybe. When you edit this later, like throw out one of her covers or something. But yeah.
Yeah.
That's okay. I'll take it. I know the artist Katerina Jabezi there. Sorry, Katerina, if I'm bugging your last name's pronunciation. Would really appreciate that. Issue 1, I had because it's like even though we kind of already debuted with issue 0, like I say, that's the prototype. That was just figuring things out. So issue 1 feels like okay, first issue officially, and so I felt like for the cover there, I didn't want to do a scene from a story inside because you look at a lot of magazines, like say Tales from the Magician's Skull. Their very first cover is of the magician, right? With the skull. Like it's like, hey, here's our guy, here's our brand, here's our magazine. And I wanted to do something similar, not like necessarily a mascot, but just like something that's kind of like, okay, here's our deal, as opposed to here's a scene from a story on the inside. Yeah, so the cover for number 1, what are we doing, right? So that is a riff actually off of a classic Frazetta painting. Whose name is escaping me. I want to say Triumph Over the Gods, Standing Against the Gods. It's that one with the guy who's on the cliff, and he's kind of like, he's real buff because he's a Frazetta guy, and he's kind of got his arms out wide, and he's looking up at the heavens, and you actually see more almost of his body than his face. His face is kind of in shadow, and you see the helmet, and there's like the lightning coming down to his sword, and there's like a, which you can't see when you're reaching above the camera there. And so I was like, okay, well, remember the magazine's whole thing, made with love for the classics, inclusive boundary pushing approach to storytelling. So I was like, all right, made with love for the classics, let's riff off of that Frazetta painting. Right? It's not like a copy, but just, you'll see, once you see it, you'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, I see what they were doing there. They were riffing off of it. But then to the inclusive boundary pushing storytelling, I was like, okay, well, this classic painting from the 70s, got a big old white guy, nothing wrong with that, but and so I was like, okay, well, who could we have? And we're really focusing on the chest, which I thought was interesting. So I was like, well, who do I not really see much of in Sword and Sorcery right now? In a lot of media, but in Sword and Sorcery right now. And I was like, well, how about we have like a person of color who is a sort of racially ambiguous, the way Katarina illustrated it, and make it a trans man, because I think about how Sword and Sorcery is very much also, I think of it as a genre of the body. You hear a lot about obviously the muscles and the good looks of all the characters in it. It's very physical. Not all the clothes get worn in a lot of the stories.
Yeah.
It's very athletic, very about combat, very about just being present in the self, and even also of course some of the love and sex elements. And so I was like, okay, and then I was like, what's really fucking badass? Making your body your body. And who's doing that, right? Trans people. And I was like, okay, well, let's go with a trans man, because then you can have this kind of cool thing where you have this like trans man barbarian, on the cover, and they've got all these scars from battle, like a classic SNS hero. But if you look for it, it's not too obvious, but if you look for it, you'll also see like a scar under each pectoral muscle, which suggests something resembling top surgery, which you might say, well, how would they have it back then? Well, the Amazons cut off their boobs, like whatever, like, let's suspend a little disbelief here. And so, yes, I was like, oh, that's awesome. Let's have a trans man barbarian on our cover holding a battle axe, which looks like the logo.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, it's got the two faces and stuff. And so I was like, yeah, okay, awesome, cool. So that way we're ripping off the classics and showing that we're trying to be more, inclusive and get everybody in there. Perfect. There's the two sides of our whole deal. So I hope people dig that cover, and it helps me to want to go open it up and see what's inside. Will there be stories with that character? I don't know.
Yeah.
Like I say, somebody was made up for this one cover just to kind of show what we're about. But yeah. So yeah, I'm pretty pleased with that cover. And then issue 2 onward is basically always going to be a scene from inside, although we'll see. I don't want to spoil it, it's too soon, but we have some big surprises already lined up for issues 3 and 4 next year, and one of them might lead to a sort of unorthodox cover, but yeah, something to look forward to.
Hell yeah. I gotta ask, what chaotic pacts did you make to get Michael Moorcock involved?
Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, it's one of those things where like I can't share all the details because then the person who connected me with him would be getting badgered all the time.
Okay.
But basically, in one sense, Michael Moorcock was not unlike any other author that I brought to the magazine. Somebody recommended them, and I was like, oh yeah, of course, Michael Moorcock. I'd love to get him. Like, what a recommendation, But then they were like, I have his email. So yeah, exactly. My eyebrows went straight up, and I was like, okay. So I wish there was some grand narrative in which I had to like fight a dragon and sell my soul or whatever. But at the end of the day, I wrote him an email. I laid out, a little bit of who I am and what I'm doing, and I was like, hey, I didn't phrase it like I'm nobody, but that was kind of the voice. I was like, hey, I'm just some guy. I sound and I was like, whatever, it's Michael Moorcock. I'll publish his grocery list. Like, I'm sure whatever it is, it's gonna be cool. People will be interested to read a new story by him. I'll take it. And then for a while, he was kind of like, oh, poor Mike. He goes by Mike. That sounds disrespectful. That's how he signs his emails. That's how he signed essays he wrote in like zines in the 60s that I've been reading at that archive. So he goes by Mike, but it just sounds so disrespectful when I call him that. But yeah, so Mike. He said, he was like, yeah, I'm having like, health problems, like my hands were getting really swollen and stuff. And bless him, he's 82, 83 now. So he was like, I don't know, it might be like kind of a vignette. And so for a while I was like, oh no, all these people back the magazine, they're expecting like a full story. Maybe I'm only gonna get like a 500 word like little thing. Oh no. And then finally around like June, he was like, okay, it's gonna be like 4,000 words. I was like, okay, good, good. It's on the shorter end, but that's, our stories tend to be about 4 to 6,000 words. So I was like, okay, great. That just gets it into the window. Okay, okay. Still don't know what it's going to be. Whatever. And then July, he's like, yeah, so I got to rewrite it from the first page. But don't worry, it'll make it better. Which, at that point, I'm trying to get it to the printers. I'm freaking out about deadlines. But it's him. Of course, I'm going to be patient. It's worth it. It's worth it. And then just blammo. He's like, yeah, so now it's 8,000 words. Also, it's Elric. It's a brand new Elric story. And I just went, oh, okay, great. Holy shit. And then like cut to me sitting at a cafe with a beer and a printout because I was like, I'm going to do this right. I want to really enjoy reading this. This to be the first guy to read a new Elric story. And that just felt wild. That felt really, really wild because like a lot of people, I've read all the Elric, I love it, and to then I never would have anticipated, that I would get to work with him or that I would get to publish a new Elric story, which also is funny too, right? Because for those of you who don't know, Michael Moorcock's been running Elric since 1961 when The Dreaming City was published. Yeah. He is running this guy for a while. He's done a lot of interesting things with him, expanded the universe, the world of it. And if you're not familiar with Elric or Michael, you should check him out because your understanding of contemporary fantasy at large across movies, books, video games, comics, everything will change. He's been so influential. If you watch Game of Thrones House of Dragon, there's one character who just looks like Elric. Matthew, what's his face from Doctor Who? So it's really cool to be kind of woven into this what feels like a grand tapestry of such an influential figure. Neil Gaiman and other George R. R. Martin, other big names will be like, yeah, I learned from Michael. I'm inspired by Michael. But also it's kind of funny because last year, I want to say Simon and Schuster. Anyway, Big Trad publisher put out 4 books, big, nice hardcovers. 3 of them were collecting all of the Elric that had come out before. And one of them was the new Elric book, Citadel of Forgotten Myths, which is great stuff. Really enjoyed that. And so it's this idea of like, okay, we did it. The definitive Elric. It's been around 60 years. Like it's been collected so many times, so many different ways. But this is it, baby. You want to get all the Elric, you get these books. And then I'm just like, I fucked that up. Yeah. Sorry. There's an Elric story that's not in those books. It's in my magazine. You gotta buy my magazine.
What was so...
So yeah. Oh, and let me stress, I wouldn't just say this for promo or whatever. Like I would just kind of move on instead of saying something. But I will say it. It was a really positive meeting your heroes experience. Michael Moorcock is the nicest, sweetest guy. And I was delighted at one point we were just chatting and realized we both like Siamese cats. And so I sent a cat picture to Michael Moorcock. She can't just think you say that sentence out loud. Like, what? So yeah, I mean, the story of how I got him was I got very lucky with the email hookup, and I just dared. I asked and got lucky again when he said yes. But the experience of working with him, as I say, had almost its kind of own narrative arc, and ultimately was I won big. I feel so lucky as an editor, and yeah, it was a real pleasure. It was a real pleasure, and yeah. I guess that's all I have to say for now about working with Michael Moorcock, but it was great. And Sapro, the alias of the artist who we brought on board to do the new Elric art. Yeah. And boy, you better believe they got a kick out of being able to like join the pantheon of Elric illustrations. There have been so many people so many different takes on Elric.
Being tasked to draw a new depiction of Elric, that has to be crazy,
And even the nitty gritty, like just Nat Webb, our excellent layout and design guy who like assembles everything in the magazine, was like, oh my god, if I could go back and tell 11-year-old me that I get to do layout on a Michael Moorcock story, I'm sitting there being like, I can't believe I'm editing this, like it just feels wild to be like, oh, what do we change this part? It's intimidating. Yeah, every part of it, man, felt wild.
Yeah, man. But on the story itself, I mean, without obviously spoiling too much, I actually regret this not being my first Elric story because it lays out everything perfectly. To who Elric is, to the Melibnaeans are, how magic works, his weird relationship with his demon that he's forced to follow. Do you consider Elric a anti-hero or a tragic hero in that case? Because I always thought of him more of a tragic hero.
Yeah, I would go with tragic myself because he's not ever really trying to go against morality. I mean, that's kind of what messes him up is that he's the one Melnibonéan who actually feels bad, right? I mean, the Melnibonéans, again, for anyone who's watching who doesn't isn't familiar with the Elric universe, the Melnibonéans, this is just me speaking. Mike and I didn't talk about this, but to me, they've always just felt like a parody of two things at the same time. They are kind of like the High Elves of Tolkien if they were a bunch of evil perverts, and they are kind of the British Empire, in the worst possible way. They're a crumbling old empire on one island who still have an outsized influence on the world, and boy, do things go poorly for them as the series progresses. But yeah, so the fact that like everybody else is like sleeping with their cousins and sisters and torturing people to make them into like little living musical instruments and just like every perversion and terrible thing you can think of. And Elric is the last emperor. He's unusual in that sense. He is an emperor, which most sword and sorcery characters are usually not royalty, but that changes quickly again. I don't want to spoil too much. He's the one guy who looks around and is like, are we the baddies? That gif. And so just like is this not okay? I don't know. And he wrestles with that as he goes forward. It's not so easy that he just is good inherently. He's just questioning it. And that's part of why he leaves his kingdom and goes out into the world of man to be like, well, what's this whole thing? How does that work? So there's actually a bit of like almost like Data from Star Trek or something. It's a bit of like, not that he's trying to become human, but he's trying to maybe relate more to the rest of the world by learning what morality is. So yeah, I think tragic between the fact that that's very hard for him and causes him a lot of hardship. Again, I don't want to spoil stuff, folks, but like people that are close to Elric don't have a great survival rate. And just in general, they're not miserable stories. They are fun adventures, but like he has a rough time. And there's a lot of talk of fate and doom. In fact, I'm rereading one of the early books, The Sailor on the Seas of Fate, which is all about that. It's all about how much free will you have versus what is your doom with a capital D, what will be your end, and what guides you there. So yeah, and then thank you for pointing out the story does work well as a first story. It's neat. It's a very early in Elric's life. I'll just say that. But also, like, yeah, I worked with Mike as an editor because Mike, bless him, has been writing long. So there were some details of Elric that he kind of in an early draft would just kind of be like, yeah, anyway, whatever, there's this, and I'd be like, hey, I know this sounds wild, but let's craft this so that if it's someone's first ever Elric story, they'll get it, they'll know what's going on. Because that's something else that's really important to me. I find with sword and sorcery, like any niche subgenre or any niche hobby in general, the people who get into it can get so into it, and they want other people to join them. They want it to be more popular. They want it to be bigger. But when they try to bring other people in, they kind of forget that the other people, even though they know they're new, they kind of forget they don't know everything they know. You know what I mean? Have you ever had someone be like, hey, get into this thing, and they just talk at you with like all this terminology and all this assumed knowledge, and you're just like scratching your head and you don't know what the hell they're on about or why it's exciting to them necessarily. They're pumped up, but you don't know.
I had a friend who was a Warhammer fan, so yeah, I do get that. And he was trying to get
there you go. And I mean, I love Warhammer, but yeah, that has a huge amount of stuff you can just overwhelm someone with, and they'll be like, okay, wait, what's the core reason you're excited? What's the baseline? You're telling me about like 17 novels of lore or whatever. And you're just like, why? What's the fundamentals? Why is this cool? Why do I want to bother with it? And so yeah, I keep that in my mind a lot when we're putting the magazine together. I always try to say to the authors, like, look, even if you've written this character in a story in another magazine or anthology or book, and you're now sharing them with me in my series, please write your story as if it's the first one that people are finding. It doesn't mean that you have to keep retelling the origin story. Like, don't worry, it's not a magazine filled with origin stories, far from it. I find those tend to be kind of dull. But it's more just like establishing like the basic stuff of what you need to know through the action. You know what I mean? Kind of like how Robert E. Howard would do that with Conan over and over again. He would just introduce him, and you would just learn who he is through what he does. And instead of trying to, big info dumps or just like assuming that you've read some other story, so therefore this scene means something to you in this story. Like, no, just write a story that stands on its own, that anybody can trip over and go, oh, what's this? Oh, cool, and get sucked into it. And even when you're dealing with a guy who, Elric, who was first published in 61. I can reveal one thing that's kind of fun that came out of my conversations with Michael, was that he said, as he was kind of presenting his new story to me, he said, as I've moved on and told so many tales with Elric, in the later tales, the more recent tales, his attitude was like, okay, well, people know who he is by now. They get it. So I'll use Elric as a way to explore other characters in his life. So I won't say who, but like this story is a really good way to add depth to a character who has showed up before in other Elric stories, though you do not have to have read them. And in this story, you'll get like a really touching, I felt, added detail, especially right in the ending. Oh, yeah. So yeah, so that's what he's been doing. He's like, okay, well, people get Elric, I'll just expand, expand, expand. But not just like add people, but like add depth to people, which I like that a lot. I like the adding of depth more than just endlessly adding more characters, kind of thing.
Why I fell in love with this genre in particular was this emphasis on the human experience, whatever that may be. With Sword and Sorcery, you show that humanity is amazing, and it does rewire how you think about even like ancient history. I was never interested in ancient history at all, but now I look at it through a much more different light and go, wow, yeah, humanity is beautiful. There's a lot of really cool stuff there. And I think your magazine emphasized that with all these different cultures, and yeah.
I mean, it's funny because we're talking about Elric, who is technically inhuman, but again, exceptions, right? Most SMS characters do tend to be human protagonists, and also like to go back to the classic Robert E. Howard's Conan, he would sometimes run into like weird, evil, goblin-y type races, but by and large, what he encountered as he traveled the world were other human kingdoms, each with their own unique cultures. And I have always found that more interesting because again, I can like understand it a little more, relate to it a little more. And also I find they tend to be a little more, I mean, there's good and bad portrayals of everybody, but they tend to be a little more interesting because they are rooted in real life history, as opposed to like, you know, stereotypical fantasy dwarves. Oh, they're all kind of vaguely Scottish and have big beards, and they got three character traits, and we know, and everybody has those character traits. Same as no, not to pick on fantasy exclusively. I mean, we've all seen sci-fi shows where it's like, oh, here's the warrior race. Every single member of the race has the one of three personalities, and they're all mad or whatever. And it's just like, good God. So, whereas it's like, yeah, why don't we, keep the fantastic, avoid some of the dodgy things that can also happen when you have demi-human races, right? Because I mean, sometimes they're a little questionable, and just focus on people because we're people and we relate to that. And so yeah, I guess it comes back to that thing I was mentioning early on about what I love about Sword and Sorcery, where the humans are center and more grounded, and then the fantastic elements get to be more fantastic because we don't have necessarily so many, and they're not like stock fantasy elements. Like Sword and Sorcery, by and large, you're not going to find Tolkien-esque or D&D type stuff in it necessarily. And there's nothing wrong with those things. And it's funny I say D&D type stuff because of this Ouroboros, right, in the history of tabletop gaming and its relationship to Sword and Sorcery and fantasy fiction, right? Like for anyone who's watching it doesn't know what the hell I'm talking about, if you go back to like old D&D from like the 70s, right? If you find like the 1979 Game Masters pardon me, what's it called?
Dungeon Master's
Dungeon
Guide.
Master book.
Yeah, Dungeon Master's
Yeah.
Guide, yeah.
You go in the back of that, it has all these appendixes, right? All these appendices. And Appendix N, which if you're into OSR, you've heard this before, but there's the Appendix N reading list that Gary Gygax put in as like a list of all these authors and a lot of specific books that influenced him when he co-created it with Dave Arneson. And there's a lot of sword and sorcery in there, a lot. I mean, there's Tolkien and some other stuff you'd expect, but man, there's a lot of sword and sorcery. So it's kind of funny that like sword and sorcery that was this less codified, less strictly defined in terms of those fantastic elements. It mixed through some fantasy and horror and history. Historical adventure is a huge part of SNS, right? So there you go, history, and even a little bit of sci-fi would get mixed in there sometimes. There's this mishmash of very loosely codified stuff that at the same time is always very recognizable. Went into D&D, right? And then D&D blows up in the early 80s with like the red box and everything, the whole Stranger Things era. And everybody looks at it and goes, huh. And between that and Tolkien, fantasy then becomes very codified. You look at contemporary mainstream fantasy from like, the early 80s onward, and it just gets very like, everybody is like, elves are like this and dwarves are like that. And you gotta have elves and you gotta have dwarves and And so, and this is partly why I think me as a young guy in the 90s, like kind of slid off fantasy because it felt very samey to me as I was seeing it. I mean, I didn't have access to as much as I do now. I probably would know better now, but and then we come to the early 2000s. and you've got the OSR starts kicking in. And what's a big influence on the OSR? Well, they go back to the original old D&D books and they look at the Appendix N list. And maybe you play Dungeon Crawl Classics, which actually reprints the Appendix N reading list in their rulebook. And they have articles all the time on their website, the Good in the Games website, about the Appendix N. And so they're bringing that back. And guess what I saw that was a big part of what got me to go back into Sword and Sorcery, right? I got into Dungeon Control Classics, read the Appendix N list, was like, oh, neat. Started listening to the podcast, Appendix N Book Club, which I strongly recommend. And then, as I said, I was lucky with that archive. I started digging in. I started reread the old, Howards, read all this other stuff that I wouldn't have thought of if I hadn't necessarily seen it on the Appendix N list. And now here I am publishing a magazine dedicated to making something that is both forward moving, but also kind of riffing off of the classic stuff that came before D&D, the kind of helped kill SNS in the 80s, even though it was born partly out of SNS. So just like it goes around, I guess. Let's hope it doesn't die again anytime soon. That's why I'm hoping for it to be nice and getting more popular as we go forward.
So I do want to ask, were you able to break through certain circles that aren't in Whetstone?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we definitely brought people in who had no idea about the Whetstone server. We would never have funded our Kickstarter if we just were like, yeah, wow, no, yeah, that would not have happened if it had been exclusively just this one little Discord or well, I don't know if you say diminutive little, but like one community, and maybe like the few Facebook groups or whatever about Sword and Sorcery, which like a lot of people, I'm getting kind of fed up with Facebook, so yeah, but yeah, no, we did manage to reach out. We did try and connect with people who like just fantasy in general, and maybe we're looking for something a little different. And I was like, well, hey, there's this, we also tried to connect with communities that wanted to see more of themselves in fiction. So, we got listed on like, I might be messing up the URL, but I want to say it was like queersci-fi.com or queersff.com. That was it. I reached out to them and said, hey, we've got queer authors and characters and stuff in our magazine. Maybe you want to help list us so other people can find this. Okay, cool. And just reached out to Locus, which is kind of the industry magazine for SFF, and got ourselves listed there, which I think definitely helped. Got ourselves reviewed. I was very aggressive about promoting, and that was a big part of it. Was not just tweeting. Like tweeting's fine, or not anymore, but not just posting, I should say. It was about really reaching out to reviewers and booktubers and podcasters and just anybody who's like talking about stuff that's exciting to them, that is this or is adjacent to this, like the role-playing game community. Like I definitely made some connections there, and I'd love to make more because so much of what we love to do at the table is riffing off of, as I say a minute ago, the very kind of stories that I'm trying to build on in the magazine. So yeah, I think you just have to be willing to like challenge yourself to go outside of like the clubhouse that you're already hanging out in. Whatever it is you're trying to create, make sure you go beyond just like the immediate group of people that you love hanging out and chatting with about it, because otherwise you're not growing it, right? You're just going around the same circle. So yeah, that was a big part of it, and also just little strategies and things like here's a free one for you folks. If you want to do your own anthology or whatever, make sure you get the socials of all the authors and all the artists that are involved. So, because one thing we did that really helped for us was, as we went into our Kickstarter, we started like a couple weeks before, and then like finished a little ways into the Kickstarter. We started doing one contributor reveal a day. So any one given day, we'd be like, okay, we're gonna have Dariel Quiog, and we would tweet about it, post about it, and we would tag him on every platform that he was on, and that way it'd be easier for his fans to find it. And it'd be easier, or any creator would be easier for their, and also let the creator know we're tweeting about them or whatever, so they're more likely to reshare. And so, yeah, that would get us outside of our little bubble into like their bubble. It's all this kind of overlapping thing of trying to connect audiences and bring in, those of your contributors, and maybe even some of your fans. If you're lucky enough to have a fan who's got a big audience, you can be like, hey, can you tell your people? Yeah. So yeah, reviews, podcasts, interviews. Lucky, I'm fortunate that I'm very sociable and very happy to blabber, as you're all witnessing here. Thank you. So yeah, not everybody is, but this is definitely one of my strengths. So I try to take advantage of that by going around chatting with folk about this whole thing. One thing that's kind of fun that I keep meaning to do. We keep talking about it, so like hopefully we'll actually do it soon.
Hmm.
Is we were thinking like, okay, so QR codes, right?
Yes.
Like people didn't really use those for a long time, and then we had the pandemic, and there's a lot of at least in Toronto, I can tell you, all our restaurants were like, okay, no menus, don't touch.
Hmm.
Just use the QR code, look at it on your phone. So now everybody's kind of like remembering what the hell those are again and actually comfortable using them finally after all these years, I guess. And I was thinking, well, why not have a QR code that takes you straight to our free digital issue zero,
Yeah.
right? And then we can just put that on a sticker and put it around. But maybe more interestingly, what we could do is we could have like what a quarto is, right? Like, or a little zine, where you print a single 8.5 by 11 page paper, right?
Okay.
You print a story on it in little panels, usually 8, and then you fold it up and you get like a little book, right?
Ah.
And it's like cheap as heck, like I said, you just print a piece of paper. And so why not do like a really short story, like 300 whatever flash fiction kind of thing, sword and sorcery, put that on a little zine sized fella, and then put the QR code at the end, being like, "Hey, so did you enjoy that story? You want to read some more Sword and Sorcery? Check out issue 0 for free. Go here."
Okay. Yeah.
So like that's on the docket.
Hmm.
God, if you ever think I don't have enough to do, become a publisher. You'll have too much to do all the time forever. It's a great way to fill up your to-do list. But yeah, like that's one thing, for example, and we're not there yet, but definitely, yeah, conventions are on our radar. I'd like to do that at some point. The tricky thing with conventions is they cost money, man. They cost money to attend. They cost money to get to. So maybe I'm gonna keep an eye on what's going on in Toronto and try and do something. Have a table or wherever, show up at one of those in the future. But it might be a minute before I get to do something I'd love to do, which is actually travel and go to things like Gen Con or Dragon Con or any of those kinds of guys. So yeah, so that's on my radar for sure. And when I have a bit more money to spend on advertising, certainly, even like I said, like these are cheap, so maybe I'll print a bunch of soft covers and bring them, various places. We'll see what happens. But yeah, definitely, like I would love to do more in-person outreach. Like I like meeting people, I like talking to people. I'm one of those freaks that enjoys working retail. If only it paid more. I like meeting people. So that's if I can do that and also promote the magazine, then for sure, yeah. But for obvious reasons, the last couple of years I've been mostly just thinking digital. So
Because the thing is, I don't know what it is. I guess the closest example I could think of is Hero Quest. I'm sure you've heard of the board game.
yeah, I had the original back in the day, and I haven't played the new one, but it looks pretty fun.
Yeah, I still have the old one from 1989, and I've taken it out with different age groups from like little kids to people roughly my age. All of them are enchanted. I think SNS does have an appeal. It's just it's just for a long time I don't think it's been marketed well. And then when I was reading your magazine, I was like, okay, this guy gets it. Oliver gets it. Like I was at a train station in one of my towns, and I was going through, and all the magazines, they're either all news or all like all news basically, even like the entertainment section. There are no literary magazines anymore. There are no Weird Tales anymore.
Well, there are, but you're not seeing them, right?
Yeah.
That's the bummer. Like Weird Tales actually still going strong. They're celebrating 100 years this year, but there's no like distribution, right? To like these most common places for people to find them. Yeah.
Yeah, and I hope maybe that'll start happening again, because I see it belongs there,
Absolutely. I definitely have been encouraged to look into comic shops for our magazine because it's so art heavy. And I can't say anything publicly yet, but I'm looking into it. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's about basically two things, right? Distribution, actually physically getting your books into the places, and then advertising, making sure people know they exist. Because if maybe you get lucky and someone just finds it on the shelf. But most of the time when you go to a comic shop, you know what you're looking for, right? You're there for Batman, or you're there to get like Warhammer figures or whatever. So you kind of want to have more people knowing about it before they even enter the store. So that's the battle, right? And I got to do all this with I don't have a publisher backing me. I am the publisher. It's just me and some really hardworking friends who are really doing a great job helping build this thing. So yeah, if anybody wants to throw a sack of money at me that I can have an advertising budget, that'd be great. I do have a Patreon if you want to link to that, which it's just my name because it kind of supports like the magazine, the podcast. It's sort of a ball of wax of what I'm doing. But yeah. If anybody wants to support us on Patreon to help us build a regular budget for doing things like advertising, that would be fantastic.
Is there anything else you want to like talk about with the magazine in particular? Like, what sort of element were you most proud of with the magazine, like with the finished product?
That's hard, right? Because I'm not proud of anything. No, that's hard because the way that producing this stuff works, my brain is already really deep into the next two issues, right? We've got pretty much the whole table of contents filled now. And because, like I said, I'm getting stuff done in advance so that we can turn around and get it to people much quicker next time. I've actually already edited 3 stories. So, so then somebody's like, what about issues 1 and 2? And I'm like, issues 1 and I remember those.
Oh, right. Okay.
But yeah. God, I mean, I want to give you an interesting answer because we've all seen interviews with people where they're like, "What was what are you proud of?" And they're like, "Everything. I'm proud of everything about it." Or like, commentated back when DVD comedy was still more of a thing. People were like, "What was it like working with everybody else?" Oh, they were all great. And it's
Yeah.
like just these positive answers that you give because you want to keep working with people and you don't want anybody to hate you, but they're not interesting for the listener.
Yeah.
So like, what's an interesting version of that? Because I am proud of everything I've got in the magazine. It would, sometimes people kind of think, oh, well, this magazine is partly about inclusivity. Are they sacrificing quality of stories? Are they just going to include an author just because they're, I don't know, black or gay or whatever? And it's so dumb because it's presuming that you can't have two parallel priorities.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, it's important to me that we don't have a magazine that's exclusively one person type. But also simultaneously, like all the stories that are in there, they're in there because I thought they were good.
Yeah.
They're in there because I thought the authors were interesting. Whether it's Michael Moorcock, a living goddamn legend, or someone June Orchid Parker in issue 2. It's her very first published story ever.
Yeah.
And but with both those authors, for very different reasons, was given faith that they do good stuff and I want them in the magazine.
Yeah.
Mike takes no explanation, obviously, but June has her own story that made me go basically like, yeah, I want this in the magazine so bad. It's so good. On top of, yeah, of course, I want to have trans rep in our authors. But yeah, so I lost my point. Pride. Okay, so I'm proud of like, yeah, the quality of the stories. I'm proud of the art that we have in it, how we've sort of integrated it all together. I'm really happy that we've improved, as I said on issue 0, with things like making sure to credit the artists as well as the authors in the sort of title page for each story. Very important to me that artists be treated as equals. I'm very proud that we navigated some tricky stuff. Like one thing we hadn't really thought of in issue 0 was content warnings or trigger warnings, whatever you want to call them, because I know this can be contentious for some people, but my whole attitude is if there's a way we can, make life easier for people who have concerns that maybe I don't in a way that doesn't, I don't know, ruin the magazine, whatever, like, for people who don't care about that stuff. Like some people aren't worried about trigger warnings, but some people it's very important. And I respect that. But some people have different lived experiences than me, and maybe reading certain things will hit them differently, right? Because of their different lives. And I don't want to make anybody feel god awful if I can avoid it. So, like, there's a story, I won't say which one, but there's a story in issue 2 that has something that kind of like it's suicide adjacent. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I want to have this magazine be kind of R-rated, in the sense that I want to have just about anything in it short of explicit sex. But I also want people to like have a heads up and not be made, thrown. So I guess okay, well that story, I was like, okay, yeah, geez, anybody who's ever like tried to hurt themselves like that way or who knows someone who has, maybe I could see them feeling really like ambushed by that in the story. So
Yeah.
I talked with people. I talked with my staff, obviously, my lovely staff, but also this is where the New Edge Sword and Sorcery Discord comes in handy, right? I can kind of throw up polls and be like, well, hey guys, you're fans of the magazine. What do you think? So I kind of had a conversation with the people I make the magazine with and the people who read the magazine who are into it enough to want to be part of the online community. And after a lot of chat, you don't need every step of that conversation, of course, for this anecdote. We got to a point of like, okay, so we do want to have trigger warnings, but we don't want to have them double as spoilers, right? I don't know if you've ever read anything or gone into something and it's kind of like, warning, this TV show contains blah, blah, blah. And you're like, oh, wait a minute. And then you're watching, you kind of figure out from that, like, oh, someone is going to get killed, okay, or whatever.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, well, I don't want, they do kind of double as vague spoilers. So I was like, how do we do this? How do we do this? Oh, I know. So what we did is issue 1 doesn't really have any trigger warnings. We didn't feel the need because of the content, but issue 2 does on two stories. So we're like, okay, issue 2, we've got that back page, right? So the back page is just like I say, a lot of magazines. It's kind of where you just like put a bunch of jumble of like stuff that you're not sure where else to put it. So that's where we put we've got a cocktail with some cool art for it. We've got like a reminder about our newsletter with a QR code to scan, and we got a little box that's like, okay, content warning. This story features blah blah blah. This other story features blah blah, and but that's at the back. So wait, isn't that bad because you're going to read the damn story and then find the warning? That's ass backwards. Okay, well that's why if you go to the very front in the table of contents, right under the column that's listing all the stories, we have in bold text underneath the stories, like with the totality of them. By the way, for the I forget how we phrased it. We definitely phrased it better than I'm about to say because we were very careful about the phrasing. But something to the effect of, if you are someone for whom content warnings are important, you can find those in the very back page. So you can just skip over everything, not spoil the actual stories, go to that back page, be like, okay, okay, heads up on this for that story, heads up on this for that story, and then go back to the beginning and feel like, all right, I'm prepared. Maybe I don't want to read that story, or maybe that story I'll be ready for it. And so yeah, I'm very proud of the fact that we've been able to do things like that to make it's part of our whole ethos of making the magazine welcoming to more people while not like kicking out people who are already around, kind of thing. So it's like this way, people I think who want trigger warnings and people who don't care about them will both be satisfied, I hope. So
Yeah.
yeah, and that's just like one. Maybe I went into too much detail there, but like it gets across. Like we put a lot of thought into every part of the magazine, and that's just one part of it where we were like, okay, we want to do this right. So I'm very proud of how we've worked with each other, the staff, and our fans to make a magazine that can be more inclusive along those kinds of lines as well. And just be really careful. And that's like I say, from that to like the fonts we choose to how we do the layout. Issue two, we started to do something kind of fun with the art. Something else I'm proud of actually. So come back to issue two. You'll see I'm ready up. You'll see in one story we took advantage of the fact that we do three columns, right? Of text on each page. We have three columns. Only magazine who does it. We got one extra column than those other losers. Whatever. It's a style that worked for us, and part of why we liked it was because you can look at it as three columns, but you can also look at it like a comic book page with 3 by 3 square, right? Like, many comics have done it, but people tend to think of Watchmen, right, which was almost exclusively told in those 3 by 3. And so when you think about it that way, you can get kind of more creative with how you mix the art and the text. And so in one of the stories in issue two, as one of our first experiments with this, it's like 3 by 3, right? The top left and top middle are text going down to the middle. So sorry, it's like the top left 4 squares are text, and then the art wraps around it.
Okay, yeah,
And so yeah, and you'll see when you get there, like it works for the art, and the art is like framing the scene that you're seeing, right? Like the text telling you blah blah happens, and then you're seeing it in the art wrapped around the text of that scene. I don't know, I really love that. I'm very fond of the artist who goes by the alias Ursa Doom for being willing to like play with me on that because that took some more work on their part. And I hope we can get to play with that even more often and more creatively still going forward. So yeah, I'm proud of how we upgraded our game, even just like layout, how it looked. And yeah, I'm also just very proud that we got it out. I mean, it's not out yet; it'll be out mid-November, but that it's made, it's off the printers, it's happening, it's done, barring a
yeah.
terrible catastrophe. I now feel safe going like, all right, it's done. Knock on wood. Oh my God. Uh, and that, despite all the obstacles, despite that was our first time doing traditional printing, despite the fact that we were doing all of the magazine's content post Kickstarter, despite the fact that, we had to sort of accommodate various people's schedules and so on and so forth, it's only a month late. And honestly, if you're into Kickstarter culture, you know that 1 month late is nothing. Is nothing. It is not unheard of, especially with some of the bigger like board game projects to get it like a year later, a year and a half later than they intended, that kind of thing. Or not finished at all sometimes. So yeah, I'm really proud that we navigated a whole new production process to get the magazine put out, and I'm really proud of like I said, the quality of what's in it, the way we've arranged it, the way it's mixed together, the way we've just tried to make it as accommodating and friendly to as many people as possible. Yeah, no, I'm really hyped about it, and of course, I'm super proud to have worked with Michael Moorcock, and I'm also really happy to have worked with all the other authors in their various levels of like career experience, right down to, like I say, June Orchid Parker. Her story fucking slaps, man, and the art is really good too. The art by Matthew Spencer. I can't stop looking at the title page for that one. How many deaths till vengeance is the name of the story, and we actually did share the art for that title page. So you know what? I'll send that to you, and you can put it up on the screen if you want
Hell yeah.
to let people see it because I love it. Um, Yeah, proud of the whole damn thing. Proud that we got cocktails. Why not?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm proud that we're going to be able to, again, like, use this to keep building momentum, do more issues. Uh, I It's so hard not to spoil, man. I got
Yeah.
surprises for next year, and I
Yeah.
just like,
Yeah.
oh, hold off. But I'm already getting excited and proud of what we're doing next, and I'm hoping, like I say, we're gonna get to expand into books, and the fact that this all is snowballing out of, that conversation, then issue 0, then the Kickstarter. Like, it's just I love it. I love it.
Yeah, no, I mean it's great to see things grow organically. I know it's kind of part of the magazine. I mean, your podcast, to see it go from basically like a diary, you documenting how it's going. It's genuinely become, in my opinion, a really great and useful tool for authors now, for like up and coming new authors. Every step of the process is being laid out in a way that is very digestible. It could be very overwhelming for a new writer.
There's so much advice out there, and a lot of it's not great, and
Yeah.
and a lot of it, like, I think I say this in the podcast at some point. I feel like, listener, viewer, if you're someone who's feeling a little overwhelmed by writing advice, I mean, funny enough, that makes me want to recommend a book that really helped me clear a lot of bad advice out of my head. But I won't get into that. What I will say is, when you're reading writing advice that's really like, you got to do this. If you don't do this, your story's bad. And if you do this, your story's good. And if every story is the exact shape of a triangle that's blue, like, just gets really hyper specific and prescriptive. Um, there might be some good stuff in there, but I would encourage you to step back from it and kind of ask yourself, well, who's giving this advice? And I don't just mean, like, are they a big name? Because big names could give bad advice or give advice poorly. Being a big name is not what makes you a good teacher. Um, it's more like, kind of look at them and be like, is this someone who maybe doesn't feel great about their own writing? And so, as a way of feeling better, they talk like they know everything?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I feel like a lot of bad advice online is people puffing themselves up. And by saying, well, it's this, how I do it is how you do it. It's the one way to do it. I don't know. I feel like that's how you spot someone who's kind of maybe a little insecure, and that's how they're expressing themselves. And it sucks that them wrestling with their insecurity about their writing can mislead others badly for a long time. Unlearning bad writing advice can really slow a person down their development. So yeah, I mean, that's a big part of why, like, with the podcast, I've been so intent on, like, keep it manageable, like you say, and always I'm just sharing what I'm doing, and what I'm doing right now, because I think your how you write never stops changing, hopefully. I often compare my writing method to, like, Frankenstein's monster, and just like, I stitch a new arm on it, and I tear off this bit and I put on this bit, and it just keeps shambling along, as I keep frigging with it, over time, and ideally improving it each time as I go along.
Loved Brian Murphy's essay. I think he's warming up to the fact that a new renaissance is coming, and you can tell that he's excited and he's happy writing it. Because I think a lot of people thought that, this was kind of it. It's kind of fading into obscurity. But books like Flaming Crimson have sort of been resurrecting it again.
Which is funny, right? Because that came out in 2019, and at that point, I mean, of a manuscript you probably finished in 2018. At that point, there was some signs of new life, but I could see why he ended the book with, I still love the genre, get into it, it's great, but I think maybe, it's still kind of lying fallow. And yeah, as you say, in recent blog posts and stuff, he's still hedging his bets a little bit, but he's opening up. He's like, okay, all right, okay, there's more stuff being published. Okay, all right, some new readers. All right, okay, yeah. Yeah, and yeah, his essay in issue 1, which is very much like, I asked him, I said to him, there's this section right at the end of Flame Crimson where you talk about just the core primal, like, why the genre makes you feel amazing, why you want to read it from that angle. And I was like, can you just like, that makes me feel so pumped when I reread that part. And I was like, man, can you put that in the magazine? Can you kind of do a condensed, like, here's like why the spirit, the heart, why it matters. And I think he did a great job. Yeah.
And then it was teamed up with art by, is that the granddaughter of Frank Frazetta?
Correct, Sarah Frazetta.
That is a bit. I didn't even know she paints. I mean, I know she runs the company Frazetta Girls, right? I know that.
Yeah. She sort of takes care of her grandfather's legacy and oversees things like I'm sure she was heavily involved with say the Taschen Frazetta book, right? Like she manages the brand, the rights,
Yeah.
whatever. Makes gallery showings and things like that happen. Yeah, she's really cool. She's really fun. She's been on the Rogues in the House podcast, I think at least twice, so you can hear
Yeah.
her chat about this stuff on there.
Right.
Yeah, and I just thought, she's not saying she's her grandfather. Like that's a tall order. I'm not saying she can't draw. I'm just saying she's not making any grandiose claims about being her grandfather. But yeah, she likes to draw, and actually, she was telling me she's taking some courses. She's trying to keep improving her art. Bless her. And I just thought, you know what? It'd be fun to have the name Frazetta in issue one. Why not? So I just reached out to her, and bless her, she was like, "Yeah, I'm game. All right, cool." And I thought, why not pair her with Brian, who was over the moon to have a Frazetta illustrating his article, of course. And it's kind of fun that we have both Frazetta and Moorcock
Yeah.
in the same magazine issue. That's about the best I can do without some kind of necromancy. So
I think that's a really great place to end. It reinforces that message of the axe. Looking forward but going back. I guess it is a passing of a torch moment in a way. Your magazine, it feels like that.
well, I sort of joked about that in the letter from the editor at the beginning, right? I was like talking all about Moorcock, for people who don't know who he is. And being like, oh, he's this legend. He's been running all this time, and Elric has been around for 60 years. Okay, what other stories do we have? And let's see if any of these characters go for 60 years. No pressure,
Yeah.
because all these other writers at various points in their career and stuff, including, as I say, absolute, first publication people. So yeah, and then that wide variety of cultures, wide variety of creators. Yeah. No, it's a good old mix. I'm proud of that. I think you know what? Yeah, there's always ways you could do better. There's always, as soon as you're done, you're like, ah, shoot, I could have nudged that over here. I could have done this. But fundamentally, I'm proud of what we achieved in terms of executing the mission of the magazine. We educating people about its history, paying respect to the classics, the living legend himself, Mike in the issue, and helping also bring forward new creators or mid-level creators to people's awareness and giving them a new venue to tell new stories in a variety of settings and variety of cultures. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like we did it.
Yeah.
And I want to keep doing it and keep doing it better as we move forward.
Exactly. And I can only hope for the magazine to grow. And if there is anyone listening who wants to get into writing SNS, into reading SNS, now is the time. I think now is the time.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited to see what's going to come forward. Now, of course, I want everybody to buy my magazine, but just something else I really believe in is lifting up others. Rising tides, all ships, all that kind of thing. So yeah, I of course would encourage people to check out Tales from the Magician's Skull, which absolutely was a huge source of inspiration for me. And then Howard Andrew Jones, who edits it, yeah, what a great guy. So much good advice I got from him. And also, he's got his new Hanavar books coming out from Baen, which are wonderful. Actually, the latest issue of my podcast, you can hear me talk with him about the writing craft aspect of that. And then, Whetstone Magazine I mentioned before, which is sort of magazine of amateurs, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I mean, their whole thing is uplifting brand new creators, right? People who've never had like a pro sale or whatever. And they're nice little short, tight stories, 1,500 to 2,500 words. I got one in issue 6 last year. So that was fun. Yeah, and that's free to read, digital online, Whetstone Magazine. And then another one that is really cool, Old Moon Quarterly. They have their Sword and Sorcery magazine, but they have kind of a little more like dark fantasy kind of vibe by and large, and maybe a looser definition of the genre, which is fine. That's their expression of it. Yeah, like Graham, Caitlin, and Julian are the 3 editors that all sort of, 3-headed Hydra behind the whole thing. And I know they're gearing up to do more. They've been doing POD for the last year. They got 6 issues out. And actually, funny enough, one of the artists who's in my magazine did a cover for issue 3, Daniel Vega, again, the guy who did Carnivore. So that's cool. We're all, because, yeah, we're all talking to each other, right? Like Graham, I shared some of my art with Graham, and he was like, oh, whoa, who's this guy? Can you put me in touch with him? I was like, yeah, of course. So, why not? But yeah, so your point is Old Moon Quarterly. Check that out, and you can check it out pretty cheap and easy. It sells at a good price, as I say, POD on Amazon. But without spoiling anything, I know they're gearing up to take it to the next level. So Old Moon Quarterly is going to have some exciting stuff going forward, too. Yeah, and there's a whole bunch of others, but I think 3 is a good place to stop for now. And yeah, but also first and foremost, get New Edge Sword and Sorcery.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which has ads for all those guys in it anyway, so why not?
Well, thank you for doing this, Oliver. It's been wonderful.
Thanks for having me on. It's nice to chat with you after having seen your little avatar floating around in Discord, right? It's always fun when you actually get to meet the
Yeah.
person with a capital M. Yeah, and thanks for helping me get the word out.
Yeah, I'm not a dwarf in space. I'm a fraud.
I was a little disappointed actually when that.